The Cornfords live in Rugby at 28 Coronation Street. John Cornford is a rich businessman of about 50. He's tall and dark. He wears dark suits, but at weekends he wears casual clothes. He usually gets up at 6, does some exercises, and goes to the office. He never gets back before 10 o'clock at night, so he doesn't see much of his family. He is interested in collecting pictures of horses. At the moment, he is traveling on business in America because he's opening an office over there next year. Sarah, Mr. Cornford's wife, is 45. She is an attractive woman with blonde hair and soft blue eyes. She is kind and gentle, very practical and full of common sense. Sarah is a housewife. She looks after the house and the family. The Cornfords have 2 children, a son and a daughter. Their son's name is Steve. He is 22. He is a clever young man. He works at a design office. He is a very outdoor person. He is a keen sailor and a member of the local yacht club. When he has a chance, Steve and his friends get down to the coast for the weekend, camping there and sailing in competitions. He plays football sometimes for a rugby team, but prefers watching the game, either on television or at the local ground where he goes with his father sometimes. Steve has a number of close friends and a beautiful girlfriend, Pauline, by name. Pauline studies at a teacher's training college. Steve and Pauline often go out for the evening to the cinema, or else they go skating at the rugby skating rink. Pauline is a very good skater, and she is trying to teach Steve how to skate well. Both Steve and Pauline are very friendly and sociable. Sometimes Steve takes Pauline to a pub where they meet some of their friends and sit and chat for an hour or so, and sometimes they go dancing at the Mecca Ballroom. Steve is very fond of Pauline. They are going to get married in a year. Steve's sister, Alice, is a lovely, quiet, serious girl. She goes to grammar school. She is a bright girl and does very well at school. Alice reads a lot. She is fond of music. She is good at drawing. She takes lessons in drawing at the local art school. Sarah's mother, Grandma, as the children call her, also lives with them. She is in her late 60s. Her kind face is wrinkled. Her hair is gray, but she is still quite young in spirit. She likes reading and gardening, and she often goes for long walks. She's a very active person. Either she's making something or mending something or doing something to entertain herself. She's extremely generous, but not very tolerant with the people who don't agree with her. Close friends. My husband and I are very lucky. We have many close friends in this city, and they are all interesting people. Our friend Greta is an actress. We see her when she isn't making a movie in Hollywood. When we get together with her, she always tells us about her life in Hollywood as a movie star. Greta is a very close friend. We like her very much. Our friend Dan is a scientist. We see him when he isn't busy in his laboratory. When we get together with him, he always tells us about his new experiments. Dan is a very close friend. We like him very much. Our friends Bob and Carol are famous newspaper reporters. We see them when they are not traveling around the world. When we get together with them, they always tell us about their conversations with presidents and prime ministers. Bob and Carol are very close friends. We like them very much. Unfortunately, we don't see Greta, Dan, Bob, and Carol very often. In fact, we rarely see them because they are usually so busy. But we think about them all the time. A busy day. Every day at 8:30, Mr. Hanson leaves his house in Church Street and drives to work. It takes him about 20 minutes to get to his office. He usually arrives there at about 10 to 9. His secretary, Mary Summers, is always at the office when Mr. Hanson comes. She has a small office next door to Mr. Hanson's, and there she types the letters Mr. Hanson gives her to answer. Mr. Hanson is the managing director of a large publishing company, which publishes a lot of technical books and magazines and sells them all over the world. Mr. Hanson's office is quite large, and it is well furnished. His desk is in the middle of the room, and underneath it is a new blue rug. The desk is very large, and on it there is a photograph of Mr. Hanson's wife, 2 metal boxes for letters and files, a round metal box for pencils and pens, a small tray for pins and paper fasteners. There is a comfortable armchair behind the desk and 2 chairs in front of it. There are some filing cabinets in a corner near the door. The window is on the right of the desk. There are pale blue curtains at the window. Mr. Hanson is fond of blue. Today, Mr. Hanson is rather angry. He is sitting at his desk and arguing with someone on the telephone. While Mr. Hanson is on the telephone, Mary Summers brings him a cup of coffee. Mary is a good secretary. A good secretary has to learn a lot about her boss. She must know how to talk to customers on the telephone and in the office, and must also arrange both business and social engagements. Today, for example, Mary knows that Mr. Hanson has to see a customer from Ghana at 11 o'clock and another customer from Hong Kong at midday. At 1:15, Mr. Hanson is to have lunch with 2 of the office managers from overseas branches of the company. Then at 3:30, he has to finish writing a letter concerning the following year's publishing program. It is Mary's job to remind Mr. Hanson about the appointments at 1 o'clock and midday, to book a table at a restaurant in the town for the lunch engagement, and to take notes from Mr. Hanson for several business letters. By the time Mr. Hanson leaves the office, both he and Mary are feeling very tired. This evening, Mary's friend Roger is taking her to the cinema, and she is looking forward to it. She likes Roger very much, and she hopes that one day he will ask her to marry him. On the way home, Mr. Hanson thinks about the day at the office and makes a note in his diary about some of the business he has to do. He also thinks about his wife, Jane, and his house. Sometimes he takes his wife flowers, and she is always glad to have them. The Hansons are very fond of each other, and they never argue. Jane sometimes thinks that Mr. Hanson spends too much time at the office and too little time with her, but then she tells herself that she can't have everything. Daily program. Jerry and Irene work in a car factory. Jerry has a wife and 2 children. Irene lives alone. She goes to night school. Jerry gets up at 6 a.m. every day. He takes a shower and starts the coffee. Then he calls his wife and the children. Breakfast is at 7 a.m. and it's noisy. The children are talking, the radio is on, and there are telephone calls. At 7:30, the children go to school and Jerry's wife goes to work. She's a clerk in a food store. At 7:45, Jerry goes to the factory. Irene's working day is different. She gets up at 7:30. She doesn't take a shower or have breakfast. She goes to a restaurant and buys coffee to go. She drinks it in her car. Irene's tired every morning. She goes to school from 6 to 8 every night. Then she studies at home from 9 a.m. to midnight. Jerry and Irene work from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Then other men and women come to work. Jerry goes home. Irene goes to school. One working day ends and another starts. Night work. Joe's a maintenance worker in a big office building. He cleans the offices and halls. During the day, there are a lot of people in the building, so Joe doesn't come to work in the morning. He starts work in the evening. He works at night. Joe gets up at noon every day. He has breakfast and reads the paper. He doesn't watch television. TV isn't very good during the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, his children come from school. He talks to them and plays with them. At 5 o'clock, his wife comes home from work. She's tired, so Joe makes dinner. Joe starts work at 8 p.m. He works from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. He has lunch at midnight. He brings coffee and a sandwich from home. At 4 o'clock, Joe goes home. The streets are calm. Some quiet music comes from an all-night restaurant. Joe's tired, but he's happy. He goes to bed at 5 a.m. A very energetic woman. Martha is always busy with her job. She gets to the office before 8:30. She takes off her coat, puts on her reading glasses, and sits down at her desk. Then she reads her mail and fills out the daily reports. If she has enough time, she has a cup of coffee. At 9 o'clock, the other workers arrive. Some of them are too tired to smile. Sometimes Martha is too busy to talk, but she says hello to everyone. At 9:30, she goes into the boss's office. She gives him the daily reports. They always talk about them for a few minutes. She tells the boss her plans for the day. Then she goes back to her office and makes phone calls. The company does business in England and Japan, so sometimes she has to call these countries. At the end of the day, she picks up the children at school. They are always happy to see her, and she is always energetic enough to play with them at home. Martha is important to the people at the office and to the people at home, and she does a good job both places. Jeff Fuller goes to Chicago. Jeff Fuller is a salesman. He has a wife and 3 children and lives in San Francisco. He travels a lot. Every week he goes to New York or Washington or Chicago. He brings home presents for his wife and children. Last week he had to go to Chicago on business. He left San Francisco on Monday morning. He got to Chicago at noon. He went to the Park Hotel and had lunch. In the afternoon, he talked to some businessmen. That evening, he called his friend, Carlos, and they had dinner at the hotel. On Tuesday, he worked all morning. In the afternoon, he went shopping. He bought toy cars for the children. He got a present for his wife, too. Tuesday evening, he was alone. At 7:30, he called his wife. He talked to the children, too. Then he was happy. On Wednesday morning, he got up at 6 a.m. He took the 8 a.m. plane to San Francisco. He didn't want breakfast on the plane, but he drank some coffee and read the paper. He got to San Francisco at 9:30. He took a taxi and went home. His wife and daughter were at home. They were glad to see him and get their presents. After breakfast, Mr. Fuller went to his office. When he entered the office, he found a number of business letters on his desk. Mr. Fuller sat down and began to look through the letters. Suddenly, the telephone rang. Mr. Fuller took up the receiver and heard the voice of his chief. The chief asked Mr. Fuller to come over to his office and discuss the results of the trip. After the talk with the chief, Mr. Fuller came back to his office and continued his work. At 1 o'clock, he went out for lunch. In the afternoon, he had several visitors. At 5 o'clock, he took part in a meeting and made a report on his trip to Chicago. Mr. Fuller came home later than usual that day. His wife and children were waiting for him. They all had dinner together. After dinner, Mr. Fuller told his wife and children about his business trip and his friends in Chicago. Then he looked through the papers and watched television. At 10:30, he switched off the TV set and went to bed. Victor's boss is angry. Victor usually gets up at 7 a.m. He does his morning exercises for 20 minutes, takes a long shower, has a big breakfast, and leaves for work at 8 o'clock. He usually drives his car to work and gets there at 8:30. This morning, however, he didn't get up at 7 a.m. He got up at 6 a.m. He didn't do his morning exercises for 20 minutes. He did them for only 5 minutes. He didn't take a long shower. He took a very quick shower. He didn't have a big breakfast. He had only a cup of coffee. He didn't leave for work at 8 o'clock. He left for work at 7. Victor rushed out of the house an hour earlier this morning because his car is at the repair shop and he had to take the bus. He walked a mile from his house to the center of the town. He waited 15 minutes for the bus. And after he got off the bus, he walked half a mile to his factory. Even though Victor got up early today and rushed out of the house this morning, he didn't get to work on time. He was 45 minutes late, and his boss got angry and shouted at him. A busy day Bill had a busy day yesterday because his parents came from San Diego. He got up early and ate breakfast. In the kitchen, he saw Darlene and Meg, and he told them about his parents. He did the breakfast dishes and began to clean up the house. He even made his bed. His parents came late in the morning and he met them at the door. They left for lunch together, but Bill forgot his keys and had to return to the house. Then they went to a restaurant. After lunch, Bill's parents left for San Francisco. After work. Harry Evans is a young factory worker. Every evening at 5 o'clock, exactly the same thing happens. A bell rings at 5. The men stop work, turn off their machines, run out, put their overcoats on, and hurry home. It is now 7 o'clock, and the factory is empty. 2 hours ago, a bell rang. The men stopped work, turned off their machines, ran out, put their overcoats on, and hurried home. At 5 o'clock, Harry always buys an evening paper when he leaves the factory and then goes home on his motorbike. He gets home at 5:30 and always washes his hands and face, takes off his work clothes, and puts on a good shirt. He eats quickly. He leaves home at 6:30 and meets his friends in town. It is 7 now. 2 hours ago, Harry bought a paper when he left the factory and went home on his motorbike. An hour and a half ago, he got home, washed, took off his work clothes, and put on a sports shirt. He ate quickly. Half an hour ago, he left home and met his friends in town. Jack Martin. My name is Jack Martin. Work in an office near here. I work from about 9 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock each day. Actually, I only work 5 days a week. I don't go to work on Saturdays or Sundays. Usually I have breakfast and dinner at home. I have lunch in a restaurant near my office. In the evening, I sometimes listen to the radio or watch television. I never go to the cinema. Occasionally, I go to a party at somebody's house. Every night I go to bed early and go to sleep immediately. I usually sleep soundly all night. Last year, I used to get to work at 8 o'clock every day. I used to set the alarm clock for 6 in the morning. At 6 o'clock, I used to get up immediately and get dressed quickly. I used to have breakfast at 6:30 every morning. For breakfast, I used to have porridge, toast, and coffee. Then I used to leave the house at about 7:45. I used to get to the office at 8 o'clock and start working immediately. Every day I used to work until 7 o'clock in the evening. Sometimes I didn't get home until nearly 8:30 at night. I used to have dinner quite late. There wasn't time to listen to the radio or watch television last year. Robert can't concentrate. Robert felt bad this morning. He got up, washed and shaved and dressed very slowly, and then got himself some breakfast. He usually has a large breakfast, but this morning he did not feel hungry at all, so he had only a piece of toast and a cup of coffee. Robert has an important examination in a few weeks, and he wanted to prepare for it. He sat down after breakfast and looked at his books, but he could not concentrate. After a while, he looked at himself in the mirror. What he saw was not very nice. His eyes were red, and he was also very pale. Just then, his sister knocked on the door. "What you need is fresh air," she said. "You study too much." They went for a walk in the park and sat in the warm spring sun for a while. Afterwards, Robert felt much better and found he could concentrate on his books. Maria Gomez. Maria Gomez was born in Peru. She grew up in a small village. She began school when she was 6 years old. She went to elementary school, but she didn't go to high school. Her family was very poor, and she had to go to work when she was 13 years old. She worked on an assembly line in a shoe factory. When Maria was 17 years old, her family moved to the United States. First, they lived in Los Angeles, and then they moved to San Francisco. When Maria arrived in the United States, she was unhappy. She missed her friends back in Peru, and she didn't speak one word of English. She began to study English at night, and she worked in a factory during the day. Maria studied very hard, and now she speaks English well. She's still studying at night, but now she's studying typing. She wants to be a secretary. Maria still misses her friends back home, but she's very happy now, and she's looking forward to her future in her new country. A quiet evening. Mr. Jones was at home at 8:30 that evening. His wife and children were at home too. Mrs. Jones was in the kitchen. She was making tea. Jane was laying the table. David was in the sitting room. He was reading a book. All this was quite normal, but Mr. Jones knew there was something wrong about the house. He was going to ask his wife about it when he saw that the television set was not working. When the family sat at the table, Jane told Mr. Jones that the TV set was out of order, and the program that evening was interesting. "Then let's talk about something," said Mrs. Jones. But there was nothing to talk about, so the children went to bed. Mrs. Jones went to sleep too. Only Mr. Jones was glad. He sat down in a comfortable armchair, took his pipe, and began to read an interesting book. A robbery. There was a robbery at 151 River Street yesterday afternoon. Burglars broke into every apartment in the building while all the tenants were out. The man in apartment 1 wasn't home. He was washing his clothes in the laundry. The woman in apartment 2 wasn't home either. She was visiting a friend in the hospital. The people in apartment 3 were gone. They were having a picnic at the beach. The man in apartment 4 was out. He was playing tennis in the park. The college students in apartment 5 were away. They were attending a football game. And the elderly lady in apartment 6 was out of town. She was visiting her friend in New Jersey. Yesterday was an unfortunate day for the people at 151 River Street. They had no idea that while they were away, burglars broke into every apartment in the building. Friday the 13th. Yesterday was Friday the 13th. Many people believe that Friday the 13th is a very unlucky day. I myself didn't think so until yesterday. Yesterday I cut myself while I was shaving. My wife hurt herself while she was making breakfast. My son poked himself in the eyes while he was putting on his glasses. Our daughter spilled soup over herself while she was eating dinner. Both our children hurt themselves while they were playing outside. And we all got wet paint all over ourselves while we were sitting in the park across the street. Yesterday was a very unlucky day. Fluency goodbye and good luck. Our neighbor, Captain Charles Allison, will sail from Portsmouth tomorrow. We shall meet him at the harbor early in the morning. He will be in his small boat Topsail. Topsail is a famous little boat. It has sailed across the Atlantic many times. Captain Allison will set out of 8 o'clock, so we shall have plenty of time. We shall foresee his boat, and then we shall say goodbye to him. He will be away for 2 weeks. We are very proud of him. He will take part in an important race across the Atlantic. Jeff and Mary are going to Spain. Jeff has a 10-day vacation during June. He and Mary are going to go to Spain. The children will stay with Mary's mother. Jeff and Mary don't have much time, so they'll fly. They are going to leave Boston on a Wednesday night. It's cheaper to fly at night. They'll arrive in Spain early the next morning. They are going to be very tired, so they'll go to the hotel and sleep. That afternoon, Jeff is going to see a bullfight. Mary isn't going to. She doesn't like bullfights. She's going to go shopping. She'll look at a lot of different things: hats, jackets, shoes. But she isn't going to buy many things. She's going to get a leather bag. That evening, Jeff and Mary are going to eat in a Spanish restaurant. There are many tourist restaurants, but they want to have good Spanish food. They are going to have seafood and wine. Friday morning, they'll leave for another city. They're going 209 to rent a car. They'll stop in many small cities. Saturday, they are going to see a castle. Sunday, they'll visit Mary's brother, Carlos. He is living and working in Spam. The next week, they aren't sure what they are going to do. It'll be warm, so they'll go swimming. And they'll have the car, so they're going to drive a lot. They'll miss their children. After 10 days, they'll be happy to go home. Text. The English about the English weather. The English weather on the whole is not exceptionally good. It's very damp. We have a lot of rain. Our weather is very changeable. A fine morning may change into a wet afternoon and evening. Conversely, a miserable morning may give place to a glorious afternoon. The English summer is usually disappointing. We expect during winter to have 2 or 3 months of extremely good weather, sunshine and hot weather, hot enough to bathe, to go to the sea. But summer months are often cool. There is always plenty of rain. Planning summer holidays is not easy because you can never depend on the weather. One year June may be hot and sunny and July and August rainy. Another year it might be the other way round. So many people who look forward to the summer holidays, if they can afford it, go abroad for their holidays, though there are so many lovely beaches on the English coast. The English winter is not cold. The temperature seldom falls below 3 to 4 degrees. The usual temperature is about 0 degrees Celsius. The air is frequently damp and foggy. It often rains, and it seldom snows. The snow melts very quickly. Autumn is the season of foggy, windy days. A spell of sunny weather in October is called an Indian summer. Spring is a warm and beautiful season. Spring flowers start to bloom from February. The weather in spring, however, is changeable, and even if the sky is blue without a single cloud in the morning, there is no guarantee that it may not rain within a short time. It is always wise to take a Mac or an umbrella. No conversation ever starts in England without a comment on the weather. It is almost a formality like shaking hands. How do you do? Comma. Nice day today, isn't it? Logically, isn't it hot today? Zrenia. Isn't it a beastly day? Zrenia. Szokowe время, nie tak li? These remarks are often used when speaking about the weather. Listening. Hurry, spring! I can't wait for spring to come. I'm tired of winter. I'm tired of the snow. I'm tired of cold weather. And I'm sick and tired of winter coats and boots. Just think. In a few weeks it won't be winter anymore. It will be spring. The weather won't be cold, it'll be warm. It won't snow anymore. It'll be sunny. I won't have to stay indoors anymore. I'll go outside and play with my friends. We'll ride bicycles and play baseball again. Just think. In a few weeks, our neighborhood won't look so sad and gray. The flowers will bloom and the trees will become green again. My family will spend more time outdoors. My father will work in the yard. He'll cut the grass and paint the fence. My mother will work in the garden. She'll buy new flowers and plant them in the garden. On weekends, we won't just sit in the living room and watch TV. We'll go for walks in the park, and we'll have picnics on Sunday afternoons. I really can't wait for the spring to come. Hurry, spring. Fluency. Happy Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is this week, and several of our relatives from out of town will be staying with us during the long holiday weekend. Uncle Frank will be staying for a few days. He'll be sleeping on the couch in the living room. My wife's parents will be staying until next Monday. They'll be sleeping in the guest room over the garage. And Cousin Bertha will be staying for a week or more. She'll be sleeping on a cot in the children's bedroom. My wife and I will be busy for the next few days. She'll be preparing Thanksgiving dinner, and I'll be cleaning the house from top to bottom. We're looking forward to the holiday, but we know we'll be happy when it's over. Happy Thanksgiving. Across the channel, Erna Hart is going to swim across the English Channel tomorrow. She is going to set out from the French coast at 5 o'clock in the morning. Erna is only 14 years old and hopes to set up a new world record. She is a strong swimmer and many people think that she will succeed. Erna's father will set out with her in a small boat. Mr. Hart has trained his daughter for years. Tomorrow he will be watching her anxiously as she swims the long distance to England. Erna intends to take short rests every 2 hours. She will have something to drink, but she will not eat any solid food. Most of Erna's school try-ins will be waiting for her on the English coast. Among them will be Erna's mother, who swam the channel herself when she was a girl. Part a text. What people do in their spare time. At weekends in England, people like to relax. You can relax in many different ways. Some people like to stay at home with their families, and others like to go out and enjoy themselves. Young people enjoy going out to pubs, to the cinema, or to nightclubs. Many young people also like to play different kinds of sports. Tennis is very popular in England in the summer when you can play outdoors. Other popular sports are badminton, football, basketball, and cricket. Cricket is a very traditional English game. It is played a lot at schools and in villages in the summer. If you have children, you often go on day trips to the seaside, or take your children to amusement parks, or perhaps to the zoo. In the summer, many parents like to take their children on picnics in the countryside, especially if they live in a big city. It is nice to get away from the noise and the traffic at weekends and relax in the country. If you have a house in the country, you probably spend a lot of your time in the garden. Gardening is another very traditional English pastime. People are very proud of their gardens and spend many hours trying to grow beautiful flowers and rare bushes. English people usually have about 5 weeks holiday a year, apart from public holidays like Christmas and Easter. Many people like to go abroad for their holidays because the English weather is not always sunny. People want to lie in the sun and swim in the sea. So they cross the channel and go to France, Spain, or Italy. Some people fly, but a lot of people drive in their cars to the beaches in southern Europe. However, many people also enjoy staying in Britain and visiting other regions of their own country. They like going to the seaside in the south of England or the Lake District in the north. Many people also go to Scotland. It all depends on what you enjoy doing. You can relax in many different ways in England. Picnic in the country. A week ago, the Smith family went for a picnic in the country. It was early spring, so they thought it was too cold to go to the seaside. Mrs. Smith packed a large basket of food, and David put it in the back of the car. They set off early after breakfast and drove about 30 miles into the country until they came to the woods. The sun was shining brightly and the ground was dry. Susan put the blanket on the ground so that they could sit on the grass. David took the food out of the car. Mr. Smith made a fire, and Mrs. Smith made tea. "Isn't it beautiful here?" said Mrs. Smith. "It's very quiet and green." David had a kite, and soon he was running across the grass with it. "Be careful," shouted his mother. But it was too late. David fell over the basket of food and everything fell out. "Look!" cried Susan. "There are ants in the food." Yes, there were. There were hundreds of them. The blanket was on the ants' nest. Weather reports. Weather reports are often misleading. They report what happened yesterday, or the day before yesterday, and not what is going to happen today. I remember a Sunday in autumn that was spoiled because of the weather report in the newspaper. "Heavy rains and thunderstorms today," it said, and we had to give up our outing, and we stayed at home all day waiting for the rain to start. In the morning, the sun was shining brightly and there was not a cloud in the sky. People passed our house on their way to the country. "Ah," we said, as we stood looking out at them through the window. "Won't they come home soaked?" At 12 o'clock it became very hot and we began to wonder when those heavy rains were going to come. "They'll come in the afternoon," we said to each other. But not a drop of rain ever fell, and it finished a grand day and a lovely night after it. The next morning we read that it was going to be a fine, warm day, and we went out without our raincoats and umbrellas. Half an hour later, it began to rain heavily, and a cold wind blew so that we came home with bad colds and had to go to bed. A wet night. Late in the afternoon, the boys put up their tent in the middle of a field. Not far from the tent, they made a fire and cooked a meal. They were all hungry, and the food smelt good. After a wonderful meal, they told stories and sang songs by the campfire. But sometime later, it began to rain. The boys felt tired, so they put out the fire and got into their tent. Their sleeping bags were warm and comfortable, so they slept soundly. In the middle of the night, the boys woke up and began shouting. The tent was full of water. They all got out of their sleeping bags and hurried outside. It was raining heavily, and they found a stream in the field. The stream ran across the field and right under their tent. Cycling. David likes cycling very much. He belongs to a cycling club, and almost every Saturday afternoon he goes off on his bicycle with his friends. In summer, he takes his little tent and his bike with him and camps in some beautiful places of the country. When it rains, it is not very pleasant, but when the sun shines and the weather is warm, camping is very nice. David and his friends cook their meals on their little stoves, make a fire, and then sing round it until it is almost midnight. Then they get under their blankets in their little tents and go to sleep. Sometimes there are bicycle races, and David goes to see them. They are very interesting. Sometimes David's big brother George rides in these races. Once he won a race and got a beautiful silver cup. David was very happy. David wants to take his bicycle to Germany next summer. He will go from England to Belgium by ship and then ride to Cologne on his bicycle. He will go with some of his friends from the cycling club. They will camp every night. Cycling and camping are quite cheap, and David's father will give him money for the ship. He will have a very good time, I think. Hobbies. My hobby is collecting stamps. When I began, I collected the stamps of all countries, but there are too many, so now I collect only Greek and Indian ones, because I have friends in Greece and I live in India. Some of my stamps are very pretty, and they are all interesting. When you look at the stamps carefully, they teach you a lot about the history of their country. My small brother's hobby is watching trains. He goes to our station and watches them there. When an engine goes through the station, he writes down its name and number. He likes train watching very much, but I don't. I went to the station with him one day, but it wasn't interesting, I thought. My big sister's hobby is sewing. She makes most of her clothes, and when I tear my shirt or my trousers, I take them to her and she mends them. My father has a hobby too. It is gardening. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon, and sometimes on other summer evenings too, he digs or plants flowers or cuts the thick grass. Harry is going to Greece. Harry. I've arranged a holiday abroad this year. I'm going to Greece for 6 weeks. I fly there on June 5th. James. June 5th? That's the day I begin my new job. Just think, as you fly out of England, I'll be putting on my new suit and trying to look like a real banker. Harry. Well, You'll earn plenty of money, but just think, when you're sitting behind your desk, I'll be lying on a beach in 27 degrees of sun. James. Well, at least send me a postcard. Too bad. A. Ronald wants to stay up late to watch a movie tonight, but he knows he shouldn't. If he stays up late to watch a movie, he won't get to bed until after midnight. If he doesn't get to bed until after midnight, he'll probably be very tired in the morning. He might oversleep. If he oversleeps, he'll be late for work. If he's late for work, his boss might be angry and fire him. So even though Ronald wants to stay up late to watch a movie tonight, he isn't going to. Too bad. B. Mr. and Mrs. Watson want to move to Arizona, but they know they shouldn't. If they move to Arizona, they'll be away from their children in New Jersey. If they are away from their children and grandchildren in New Jersey, they won't see them very often. If they don't see them very often, they'll feel lonely and depressed. So even though Mr. and Mrs. Watson want to move to Arizona, they aren't going to. Too bad. Part a text. The Wilsons' party. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson invited all their friends and neighbors to a party last night. They stayed home all day yesterday and prepared for the party. In the morning, the Wilsons worked outside. Their daughter Margaret cleaned the yard. Their son Bob painted the fence. Mrs. Wilson planted flowers in the garden, and Mr. Wilson fixed their broken front steps. In the afternoon, the Wilsons worked inside the house. Margaret washed the floors and vacuumed the living room carpet. Bob dusted the furniture and cleaned the basement. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson stayed in the kitchen all afternoon. He cooked spaghetti for dinner, and she baked apple pies for dessert. The Wilsons finished all their work at 6 o'clock. Their house looked beautiful inside and out. Everybody enjoyed the Wilsons' party last night. The guests arrived at about 7:30. After they arrived, they all sat in the living room. They ate cheese and crackers, drank wine and talked. Some people talked about their children. Other people talked about the weather. And everybody talked about how beautiful the Wilsons' house looked inside and out. The Wilsons served dinner in the dining room at 9 o'clock. Everybody enjoyed the meal very much. They liked Mr. Wilson's spaghetti, and they loved Mrs. Wilson's apple pie. In fact, everybody asked for seconds. After dinner, they sat in the living room again. First, Bob Wilson played the piano and his sister Margaret sang. Then Mr. and Mrs. Wilson showed slides of their trip to Hawaii. After that, they turned on the stereo and everybody danced. As you can see, the Wilsons' guests enjoyed the party very much. In fact, nobody wanted to go home. At a party. It was a few days before Christmas, so when the office closed at 5:30, most of the young men and typists stayed and had a party. They ate and drank, danced and sang songs, and nobody wanted to go home. But Joe had a wife at home and lived quite a long way from the city. Every few minutes he looked at his watch, and at last, when it was very late, he began to leave. "Joe!" shouted his friends. "Are you leaving? Why don't you stay and enjoy the party?" "I am not leaving," said Joe. "I am only going down to the station to miss the train back home. I will be back here in a few minutes." Pay RT a text. The Baxters go shopping. The other day my wife took me on a usual shopping round. In fact, I hate going to the butchers, grocers, and other shops of this sort, but of course I have to help my wife about the house. First, we bought some pork and beef at the butcher's. Then we dropped in at the grocery and greengrocery. Jill wanted to buy sugar, salt, tomatoes, and cucumbers. We also called at the baker's where we bought a loaf of brown bread, some buns and biscuits. On our way home, we were passing Selfridges. "Let's drop in here for a while. You need a suit for everyday wear," my wife said. One agreed. Selfridges is still one of the biggest and most popular stores in London. They sell everything here. All the things for sale are on the counters. The customers walk round and choose what they want. The store has several departments: women's clothes, men's clothes, shoes, toys, sports goods, umbrellas, leather goods, china and glass, food, and so on. When we entered the shop, we went straight to the men's department. A salesgirl showed us a number of suits, but we didn't like any of them. One of them was a bit loose on me. Another was too tight. As to the third, our opinions were quite different. I liked the suit. My wife found it too expensive. She wanted a suit as good as that one, but less expensive. The salesgirl showed us a cheaper suit. It was of good quality, but I didn't like the style. We were about to leave the counter when they delivered a new selection of goods. They were not only suits, but different kinds of clothes: coats, raincoats, shirts, jackets, and trousers. I tried on 2 or 3 suits. The last was all right. It was just my size and fitted me perfectly. We both liked the suit, and the price was not high. "We'll take it, wrap it up, please," I said to the salesgirl. After we left the men's department, my wife spent the rest of the morning trying on hats. She wanted a pink straw hat to match one of her summer frocks. There was such a good selection of hats in the shop that in the end Jill bought 2. Nothing to eat for dinner. Jane had to work overtime at the office today. She got home late, and she was hungry. When she opened the refrigerator, she was very upset. There was nothing to eat for dinner. Jane sat down and wrote a shopping list. She needed a head of lettuce, bananas, a quart of milk, a dozen eggs, 2 pounds of tomatoes, a pound of butter, and a loaf of bread. Jane rushed out of the house and drove to the supermarket. When she got there, she was disappointed. There weren't any bananas. There wasn't any milk. There weren't any eggs. There weren't any tomatoes. There wasn't any butter, and there wasn't any bread. Jane was tired and upset. In fact, she was so tired and upset that she lost her appetite, drove home, didn't have dinner, and went to bed.